Preface. This is a story of a life lived between tides, where the quiet pulse of the fjord was as constant as the heartbeat of the world. It begins not in battle, but in the soft rhythm of everyday life, where a young boy, raised in the shadow of the northern mountains, first dreams of the wide sea. His journey is not one of conquest or pillage, but of trade, of connection, of the quiet wisdom that comes from the passing of time. In the dawn light, as the first rays of the sun touch the cold waters of the fjord, he sets sail, not as a warrior, but as a trader, with a heart full of wonder and a spirit open to the world. He will travel to distant lands, not to conquer, but to learn, to trade, and to bring home the gifts of stories, spices, and silks from places far beyond the reaches of his childhood. Through his eyes, we see the world unfold, a world full of both familiar comforts and foreign mysteries. And as the years pass, he discovers not only the cities of faraway shores, but the deep, steady peace that comes from building a life grounded in love, family, and the quiet warmth of the hearth. This story is not one of grand battles, but of small, intimate victories, the triumph of a quiet man who understands that the truest adventures are the ones that lead us home. Chapter 1, The Fjord at Dawn. I was born to the sound of water. The fjord outside our wooden home was a mirror in the mornings, still, wide, and silver blue, like the eye of a sleeping god. It cradled the mountains and the sky together, and on quiet days, it seemed the world held its breath just to listen to it. That is my earliest memory, the hush of dawn, and the low murmur of the tide beneath the planks of our dock. My father was always up before the sun. He said the light was purest when it hadn't yet touched the world, and that it whispered things it would not say aloud once the day began. I would sit on the worn bench beside his carving table, wool cloak pulled tight against the chill, and watch the way his hands coaxed smooth curves out of stubborn wood. Longboat ribs, or shafts, spoon handles, he carved them all with the same quiet reverence, humming low as the shavings fell to the earth like curls of soft snow. Inside the house, the hearth was always warm. My mother would have porridge bubbling gently in the clay pot, its scent mingling with smoke and the faint tang of the sea. She would hum, too, but higher, soft melodies that floated through the rafters like drifting gulls. I remember the comfort of that sound, how it seemed to stitch the morning together, my father's hum, my mother's song, the wind's sigh across the water. My chores were simple in those days. Feed the goats. Gather driftwood. Help lay out the fishing lines. But I did them with purpose, for each task tied me more closely to the rhythm of life around me. When I walked down to the water, I would pause at the edge and stare down at my reflection, rippled and shifting. I would wonder where the waves began, and what lands lay beyond the curve of the world. The village was small, a cluster of homes with turf roofs and smoke trailing like fingers into the sky. The other children and I would race through the trees behind the houses, pretending to be ravens or sea serpents. Sometimes, we would gather near the skald, the old man who told stories in exchange for bread and mead. He spoke of gods who walked in human shapes, of sea kings who traded amber for silk, of cities far to the south where buildings rose like mountains of stone. But it was the tales of Paris that stayed with me most. He spoke of it in winter, when the fire was low and the night came early. Paris, he said, was a city of bridges and bells, where candles burned like stars and foreign voices filled the air. I imagined the scent of baked bread I had never tasted, the texture of woven cloth my hands had never felt. I imagined walking its streets not as a raider, but as a guest, offering carved bone and northern furs in exchange for trinkets of glass and copper. I did not tell my father I dreamed of going there. He had never gone beyond the North Sea, and though his hands shaped the ships that carried others far, his own feet stayed close to the fjord. He said the sea was a beast you could never fully trust, and he had already lost 2 brothers to its depths. But he did not stop me from dreaming. Instead, he taught me to tie knots that would hold through any storm, to read the clouds like a storybook, and to listen for the pitch of the wind before it shifted. "You must know the sea," he said once, his eyes narrowed against the morning sun, "before you ask it to carry you anywhere." So I learned. I listened. I watched. At night, when the stars appeared like salt scattered across the sky, I would lie on the roof with a fur under my back and watch them wheel slowly overhead. The old one said they were torches held by the gods as they walked the high path. I liked that thought, that we were never truly alone, that someone up there watched over us as we slept. Those early years passed slowly, like the river ice melting in spring. There was no hurry in them. Only the steady unfolding of a life tied to tide and timber, to warmth and work, to stories and songs. And even then, before I had ever touched an oar or seen a sail snap in the wind, I knew this truth in my bones. The world was wide. And I would go. Chapter 2, The Sea Beneath My Feet. The day we left the fjord, the morning air smelled of wood smoke and salt. Our ship waited at the water's edge like a creature ready to wake, its dragon prow pointed toward the mist. I stood on the shore with a pack slung over one shoulder and my father's hand resting heavy on the other. He said little, only gave me a nod and placed a small carved pendant into my palm, ash wood, shaped like a whale's tooth. "For luck," he said, and I nodded, unable to speak. The sea was calm that morning, quiet as breath. As we pushed off, I looked back just once to see the trees thinning into mist, the roof of our home barely visible beneath the slope of the hill. Then the wind caught the sail, and we were gone. We were 12 in total. Traders, not raiders, though the line between the two, as I would come to learn, was thinner than a splinter. We carried carved combs and iron nails, antler buttons and rolls of thick wool. There were furs, soft with the scent of the forest still clinging to them, and small sacks of amber that gleamed like trapped sunlight. We bartered for copper, beads, wine, and stories. Always stories. The days at sea were long, but never dull. The sky stretched wide above us, a moving ceiling of clouds and stars. Some days the wind was strong and the sail pulled taut as a drumskin. Other days, we rowed, backs bending like reeds with the rhythm. My hands blistered and hardened, but I found comfort in the creak of the ship's timbers, in the hush of waves parting beneath us. There was laughter, too, low and knowing. One of the older men, Eric, sang songs in the evenings, his voice rough like gravel but warm. Others whittled by lanternlight, or shared tales of cities they'd seen, markets they'd bartered in. I listened, wide-eyed, asking quiet questions as the stars blinked awake above us. It was on the 12th day that we reached the river that would carry us to Paris. The land rose gently on either side, green and unfamiliar, dotted with stone buildings and the scent of wood fires drifting on the breeze. The river narrowed in places, bending like a snake, and the ship moved slower as we took in the world beyond our north. Paris did not come all at once. First there were farms, broad fields of grain and flax. Then villages, with children running barefoot and women hanging linens like white sails across courtyards. Some stared at us as we passed, others waved. I waved back, uncertain but smiling. And then, one morning, we turned a wide bend in the river and there it was. Paris. It rose from the river like something dreamed. Stone towers and timbered houses clung to the banks, and bridges arched like braided threads across the water. Bells rang from a tall spire in the distance, clear and high as birdsong. The city breathed, slow and steady, and I breathed with it, full of awe. We moored near the market, where scents curled in the air, roasting chestnuts, beeswax, spiced wine. The language was strange, like a song sung through water, but there was warmth in the faces of those who met us. Coins changed hands, goods laid out on woven mats. Our wool and amber were taken eagerly. In return, I held dyed cloth in colors I had never imagined, deep crimson, ocean green. I tasted olives, sharp and bitter, and sweet figs wrapped in paper like gifts. I watched a boy spin a puppet on a string, his eyes bright with mischief. That night, we stayed in a large hall where travelers gathered. There were candles everywhere, melting down like quiet clocks, and the firelight danced on stone walls. I sat beside Eric, sipping warm drink from a wooden cup, and listened to the sounds of this strange place. Laughter in foreign tongues. The crackle of the hearth. My own heartbeat, steady and grateful. I did not feel far from home. I felt expanded, as if my heart had stretched wide enough to hold both fjord and river, both pine smoke and candle wax. When I returned to the ship the next morning, I did not leave empty-handed. I carried coins, yes, but also a folded scrap of silk the color of sky at twilight, a small bell that chimed softly in my palm, and a story I would tell for the rest of my days. And as we turned back toward the sea, the wind filling our sail once more, I looked over the stern and whispered a promise. I will return. Chapter 3, Amber and Firelight. Years passed, as gently as falling snow. The fjord was still the same, broad, cold, and steady, but I had changed. The wind no longer tugged at me with the same urgency. My heart, once stretched toward the sea, had found its way home again. I built my house on a low hill overlooking the water, not far from where my father's home had once stood. By then, his hands had grown still, his carving tools wrapped in linen and tucked away. My mother's songs had quieted too, her voice now part of the wind that rustled through the pine trees. But I felt them both in the hearth's warmth and in the wood I carved for my own children's toys. I had met her on a return journey from the southern coast, a weaver's daughter, quiet-eyed and strong of will. Her fingers smelled of wool and crushed berries, and when she smiled, it was as if the whole world softened around her. We married in spring, beneath budding branches and birdsong, and our home grew together, one beam, one stitch, one breath at a time. Each morning, I rose with the pale blue light and walked down to the shoreline. The smell of salt and morning mist filled my lungs, grounding me. I would run my hands over the boat moored in the shallows, check its hull, tighten ropes. Though I no longer sailed far, I still made short trips to nearby villages, carrying goods and stories, returning with flour, salt, and news. Trade became less about the thrill of travel, and more about the quiet exchange of needs and kindnesses. I brought amber and carved beads, horn spoons, and warm wool cloaks dyed in soft browns and grays. In return, I was given grain, iron tools, and sometimes the rare pleasure of southern fruit, sweet and golden in the winter. But more than what I traded, I came to value what I built. Inside the home, my children grew, first one, then two. A boy with his mother's eyes, a girl with her laugh. They ran through the meadow barefoot in summer, their voices like bells among the tall grasses. In winter, they curled by the hearth, playing with wooden animals I had shaped for them with careful hands. Our evenings were lit by firelight. The scent of smoke and baked bread lingered in the air, and the walls flickered with the shadows of our quiet life. I told them stories then, not of raiding, not of war, but of markets along the river, of bridges strung like threads across foreign lands. I told them of a city with candles in its windows and music in its stones. I told them of kindness in unfamiliar tongues. My wife wove as I spoke, the shuttle clicking gently against the loom. Her cloth hung on the walls and wrapped our children at night. Her skill was known across the region, and traders often came with coin or salt to bargain for her blankets. She smiled quietly, proud but never boastful. We were partners, both builders in our own way. Seasons turned like the wheel of a cart. The goats grew old. The roof needed patching. I taught my son to mend it, just as my father had taught me. I showed my daughter how to choose the right branch for a fishing spear, and how to listen for changes in the wind. Sometimes, at dusk, I would sit outside with a cup of warm mead and watch the fjord turn silver again. The same mirror I had gazed into as a boy now held the reflection of my own children. I marveled at how life repeated itself, not in circles, but in spirals, wider each time, deeper. I still wore the whale's tooth pendant my father gave me. It hung around my neck, smooth with years of touch. When my son asked what it was, I pressed it into his palm and said, "This is a promise." He didn't understand yet, but he would. And there were nights, quiet, firelit nights, when I would take from a small chest a folded scrap of twilight-colored silk and a tiny bell no larger than a walnut. I would hold them in my hands and remember. Not with longing, but with peace. Because the road had led me here, not just to places I had never seen, but to a life I had never known I wanted. Amber and firelight. That's what this part of life felt like. Warm. Steady. Full of quiet glow. Chapter 4, The Long Quiet. The winters come earlier now. They press their pale fingers against the windows before the last leaves fall, and linger long into the spring's thaw. I feel them in my joints, in the slow curl of my hands, in the way I must pause before rising from the bench I carved in younger days. But I do not mind the slowness. There is a softness in it, a quiet dignity, like watching the tide return again and again to the same familiar shore. My children are grown. The boy, now a man with broad shoulders and clever eyes, has taken over the trading routes. He sails down the river I once did, bartering carved bone and wool for foreign coins and glass beads that catch the light like frozen rain. He writes now, too, scratches small, careful marks on birch bark to track what he gives and receives. I watch him sometimes and smile. He is more than I was. He is something new. My daughter lives nearby, with her own children. They visit often, carrying woven baskets of dried herbs and cheese wrapped in linen. They fill the house with their laughter and muddy footprints, and I sit by the fire, a quiet observer of their joy. The youngest climbs into my lap and asks to hear about the time I sailed to the city of bells. I tell her, of course. Every time, as if it were the first. I keep a small chest near the hearth. Inside it are only a few things: the twilight blue scrap of silk, still folded neatly, the bell from Paris, its chime now faint and worn smooth with years of handling, the whale's tooth pendant, its edge polished by the press of many thumbs. These are not riches, but they are the weight of my life. I hold them sometimes when the nights are long, and the wind rattles the walls like a child asking to come inside. The sea still calls to me, though softer now. Not with the urgency of youth, but with the hush of an old friend. On clear mornings, I walk with my staff down to the fjord. The boat is gone now, given to my son, but the water remains. Silver and deep, whispering its endless secrets. I stand at the edge, breathe in the salt and pine, and remember. I remember the scent of wet rope and new sails, the way the horizon widened as we left the land behind. I remember Eric's rough songs and the way we laughed with our mouths full of foreign bread. I remember the bridges of Paris, how they arched like a prayer across the river. I remember holding my wife's hand for the first time, the touch of her fingers warm and certain. And I remember the silence, too. The good kind, the one that settles in after a full day, when all is done and the fire crackles low and your heart is still. Some say the gods wait for us beyond the sea. Others say they walk beside us all our lives, unseen but always near. I do not know which is true. I only know that the world gave me more than I ever knew to ask for. It gave me sails and firelight, children and stories, the crack of frost underfoot and the scent of bread in the oven. It gave me a life that began in wonder and ended in peace. Sometimes, when the stars are bright, I sit on the porch wrapped in fur and watch the sky turn slowly overhead. I see the constellations my father once showed me, their shapes unchanged. I whisper to him then, to my mother, to Eric and all the others whose names are now wind. I remember. And I do. Each moment, each face, each crossing of river and return home again. My life has been a tapestry of journeys stitched with care. And now, in the long quiet, I rest beneath it, warm, held, and whole. The fire burns low. The room is dim. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft and steady, covering the earth like a blessing. And in this final hush, I close my eyes, not in sorrow, but in thanks.